Frame and panel construction is used extensively in classic furniture making. So here's the basic diagram. You have two stiles, two rails, and those make a frame. And inside this rigid frame there's a thin panel, and it can have a beveled edge or some different profile, or it can be simply flat, doesn't matter. It's the same basic idea. Here's an example with all parts just square and very basic. Here's an example with a little bead carved on the frame and the panel slightly raised with a beveled edge. So all these elaborate carvings and profiles are just used to make these pieces more interesting. The basic construction can be made with flat pieces, but in classic furniture it's usually have some profile, either carved on the frame or an applied molding, like in this example here. You have your frame, your panel with a profile here. The edge is slightly beveled and it has a small decorative trim here. And there's a large applied molding on the seam. Okay, here's an exploded view of frame and panel. So this sort of thing is used mostly for doors or cabinet sides. You can see some doors here. Okay, this bed also has frames and panels. Okay, in this case it's not a single panel, but it's one large frame split into multiple pieces, and it has 5 smaller panels inside it. That's another way to use it. Okay, sometimes these panels are not just square or rectangular, but they have some very ornate shapes, like this one here, or maybe this one here. And this is all just used to create some beautiful doors or beautiful furniture, just to make it look better and more interesting. Sometimes the panel is made of glass or a mirror, it doesn't matter. It's basically the same thing, still frame and panel construction. Okay, so you have multiple options on how to create this thing in 3D Max. The most elaborate one and the one closest to reality is by creating these pieces as they would be created if you were a joiner or cabinet maker. But that's usually not practical, takes a lot of time, and the result is not that much different to justify spending so much time on it. Okay, so the most basic way to create a frame and panel door or any other piece of furniture is by drawing a profile line. So for example, this is going to be the frame. It's going to go down, and here we're going to start a profile for the panel like this. Okay, I'm just going to chamfer these edges so they are not so sharp and pointy, just a little bit. Okay, and this is going to be our profile for the frame and panel door. And once we have a profile, we also need a path. In this example, it's going to be just a regular rectangle for basic rectangular door. And once you have these two lines ready, you can create the final model by using a bevel profile modifier or the sweep modifier. I usually use bevel profile since I'm more used to it. So add bevel profile, pick your profile, and if it's pointing the wrong way, press 1 to activate the profile gizmo and just rotate it around so it's facing the correct way. And that's a basic frame and panel door, very quick to create. Okay, In some cases, these doors are actually created like that with mitered 45-degree joints along the corners, but in most cases they are not. In most cases they usually have seams like these. I'm just going to create a basic material with the wood texture as the diffuse map to demonstrate. Okay, let's assign it. Edit poly. So let's say this part has vertical grain and this part has horizontal grain. It's usually a good idea to map your objects as you are creating them. It makes it much more efficient, and you can create your final model faster. Okay, so you can create something like this. Okay, just a second. All right. But usually these doors have these straight edges, so this means this doesn't work for us. Let's delete it. And to map it correctly, we need to add some geometry. And it's easy to do with Edit Poly modifier. Just add Edit Poly. And using Slice Plane, move the plane to the point where you want to add the seams. So for example here, click Slice. Same on the other side. Slice. And now you can map it correctly. And that would be, these parts would be vertically grained. Okay. And these little horizontal pieces would have horizontal mapping. And this is a much more accurate result than the one we got before. Okay. So that's the basic frame and panel. If you wish, you can add some more elaborate designs here. So for example, I'm going to modify my profile line and slightly change it. Maybe let's add a bead here. Okay, like this. And it probably would mess up your mapping, so there's no need for that. And now you have a slightly more elaborate profile. And the nice thing about these profile lines is that you can easily adjust the dimensions and the proportions later on. But before you have mapped the object, so for example, you can do it like this. You can make this part smaller, larger, or whatever you want to do with it. It's very quick to make some adjustments. And once you're happy with the final shape, that's when you usually would add Edit Poly for these vertical cuts over here and here, and add the UVW mapping. You can also make some more elaborate profiles. For example, let's pretend it has an applied molding on these edges here. I'm gonna add some more detail. So just something like this. It doesn't matter if you can't see the exact profile of the molding in your reference photos. Doesn't really matter, as long as the final result looks pretty good and believable. The thing about these profiles is that it's usually impossible to tell exactly how they are made if you don't have the object in front of you in real life, so you can go from different directions and look at it. So it doesn't really matter. So just as long as it looks close enough. And maybe let's make this one more elaborate as well. Let's raise this center part a bit more. Okay, and that's an advanced profile here. And you can still change the dimensions easily. For example, let's bring the center part in. Or make this part larger. You can do all this very easily. So it's a very flexible and very easy way to create very difficult looking profiles for frame and panel construction. Okay, so this one is a bit trickier to map correctly. If you have a large profile, large applied molding, it actually looks like this in real life. I'm just going to show you an example. Maybe here. It's a bit hard to see with the wood grain. Alright, here's an example. Let's just zoom in. The profile itself has a mitered diagonal edge or joint, but the panel has these vertical joints. So this means it's probably quite difficult to map correctly if it's created in this way. For basic square objects it might be okay, but if you have these curved profiles, it's usually a better idea to create the profile object separate from your frame and panel. So if you have made it this way, it might take you quite a bit of time to fix the mapping. So you would start by using slice plane. Maybe let's slice it here. Actually somewhere in the middle of the profile or the molding. Slice here. And slice here. And now it is quite difficult to accurately select just the things you want to map vertically. Okay, so it would probably be in these polys, and I would use a box map here since the profile is pretty thick, and from the side view it would not look right with planar map. Okay. And once you have these, add edit poly, go to poly sub-object mode, press Ctrl I to invert the selection, and map these other pieces like so. Okay, and let's rotate it. Okay, so as you can see, it's doable to map these correctly if your frame and panel is square. It would be probably quite a bit more difficult when you have an object like this. Okay, so let's look at another example. Let's look at something like this bed frame, where you have multiple panels and multiple profiles or applied moldings. So in this case, well, the fastest way to create something like that would be create one of the panels and throw on some symmetry modifiers. And you just would have to fix the mapping a bit later on. And you can use these symmetry modifiers to add as many as you need. And if you need an odd number instead of an even number, you can just move the symmetry modifier to the center of one of the panels. But as I said earlier, you would probably have to fix the mapping. Okay, another way to create this multiple panel construction is by first creating the frame. So for example, let's add some panels inside this large frame. So it's not going to be too precise, but I'm just going to show you the principle. Okay, and attach these little squares or rectangles together, extrude it, so that's going to be the frame. You can add edit poly and add the edges needed for correctly mapping this object. So for example, let's add an edge here. And here. Okay, so now you have all the geometry needed to quickly map it. And for the inner panel, You can use a plane or a thin box, doesn't matter. Just make it larger than all the holes. Like this. And now you just need to add the profiles. And for that, I'm just gonna create a rectangle snapping to this inner line. And draw a profile. Okay, doesn't matter the exact shape, so just create a profile. And that's going to become our applied molding. And the good thing about this method is that you can easily adjust the profile independently from the frame. Okay, looks like it's inside out. You can add the normal modifier to fix that. And you can modify this profile, you can scale it, you can change the shape of it independently from the frame and the panel. And this method is very flexible. And it also makes it easier to map these things correctly. So for example, I'm going to create some instances here. And we're going to map them very quickly. Okay. And let's add the material to these objects. And for example, let's start with this plane, or the box, or the panel. Just add UEW map, set the size. Okay, like this. Let's map on the frame. And all the geometry is already there. You just have to select it. And map it. And you don't have to zoom in and look at the profile very closely to make sure you don't have any wrong faces selected. It's just the basic frame. Okay, that's mapped. And for the profile, you can just map one of them, since they are instanced. You can just map the first one and the rest will be mapped automatically. Okay. Add edit poly and select these horizontal pieces and map them. It's a very quick way to map the whole thing. And as you can see, the mapping is perfect. The frame is mapped perfectly. You have the grain going vertically. These vertical pieces, horizontally on the horizontal pieces. The profiles are mapped correctly, having these 45-degree mitered joints on the corners. And it's pretty easy to do, maybe even more so than this method where you have to zoom in and look closely if you don't have any wrong faces selected before mapping. So sometimes it's useful to create these things as separate objects instead of one profile for the whole thing. Okay, so that's the basic frame and panel construction.